So our next discussion is going to be very interesting, considering the ongoing war in the Ukraine that we all hope should end very soon. So this is navigating the shifting geopolitical landscape. As you know, Russia decided to invade Ukraine, which has changed a lot of the geopolitical landscape in Europe. We've been looking at the rise of China for many, many years now. And of course, everything that's been going on has brought up issues of the role of the EU, its long-term relationship with NATO and the US. And we're going to have all of that discussion today. So can I welcome on stage Jean-Claude Juncker, former Luxembourg Prime Minister, former President of the European Commission, and Herman van Rompuy, former Belgian Prime Minister, former President of the European Council, and they will be interviewed by Frieden partner Elvinger. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to those here in the audience and those who are watching from far. These are extraordinary times, and that's why I think I also got an extraordinary role today. Because for many years, for at least for 15 years, this person next to me asked me a lot of questions, because he used to be my boss when I served in his government. Today, roles change, but only for 1 hour.
Yes.
Because I have been asked to moderate this panel in extraordinary times with extraordinary guests. And indeed, it is a great pleasure for me here on behalf of this conference to welcome for this 10th conference two great Europeans who really by their whole life marked important steps of Europe and also have been in many difficult times confronted to challenges of Europe, but I think those that we are facing right now are quite extraordinary. And it was mentioned since the 24th of February, one country, Russia, attacked another country without that country having provoked Russia. Russia is not just any country, it is one of the superpowers, as we learned that when we were young. And so this asks a lot of questions about Europe, the way forward, about the security architecture in Europe. Our guests today, you know them, but we have Herman van Rompuy, the former and first permanent president of the European Council, where all the heads of state and government are gathering, so the highest entity, the highest body of the European Union for the representatives of the states. He was beforehand Prime Minister of Belgium. He was President of the Belgian Parliament and many other functions as well. And one of the functions, by the way, that we all three had, that was Minister of Budget. Because the first time I met Herman van Rompuy was in the 90s when he was Minister of Budget, and I had that function in Luxembourg. Prime Minister Juncker was serving as Prime Minister of this country for 18 years, from 1995 to 2013.
18 years and 11 months.
18 years. At the same time, for a long time, Minister of Finance also, Minister of Labor, where he started, which he liked very much, as I know. And his last step in his political career was, as you all know, President of the European Commission from 2014 to 2019. And let us start right away with what happened, maybe looking a little bit backwards, and then the present situation, and then looking to the future of Europe. This is a little bit how I want to organize this talk. We were, and you were, many times in Moscow, and President Putin also visited Luxembourg. What went wrong? Because we thought we had a neighbor who had accepted the peace order of the post-Cold War. There was peace in Europe. We were concentrated on many issues, but not on security issues with Eastern Europe. So, Jean-Claude Juncker, you met him so many times, Vladimir Putin. I was fortunate to attend one or two of these meetings, but you had many more. What changed, and were we prepared for this?
Good morning, Boyan. Everything has changed. And the consequences of what we are witnessing are far-reaching consequences. I have to say that till now, I don't understand what has happened, because I have known Vladimir Putin for so many years. I had so many discussions with him, mainly one-to-one discussion without interpreters, without officials, because he's fluent in German. I was very much surprised that his German was of the best quality you can imagine. I remember I had a nightly meeting with Angela Merkel and Putin in his suite in Brisbane, where we attended, Herman and myself, the G20 meeting back in November 14. And from time to time, Angela Merkel switched into Russian. And then Putin was translating for me in German, because I didn't understand Russian. But who does understand?
What is this?
Das ist aufgefallen. Das ist aufgefallen.
I'm losing all my means. So, I have known Vladimir Putin as being a serious guy who was mainly in the first half of his mandate as a president really European. And suddenly he changed. And I don't know why. I know that he was very much disappointed by the Western behavior when it came and comes to Russia, because he always told me that we did not respect our commitments, which is partly true, but which, of course, is not a reason which would justify this awful war he provoked in Ukraine. I was always of the opinion that we have to have normal relations with Russia, because for there is no European security map without the contribution of Russia. Russia is our neighbor, we can't change geography, and so we have to deal with the Russians. But we made mistakes, and these mistakes are important, and they should not be forgotten in order to allow us not to repeat the same mistakes. But this is not the moment where we can discuss in normal terms with Russia, but the day will come where we have to reconnect in a way or another with Russia. Not necessarily with Putin, but with Russia, because geography is geography.
President Van Rompuy, when you were in these European Council meetings, you often discussed Russia on different topics. When you saw all these prime ministers and presidents around your table, was there unanimous view on Russia, or is this maybe something that Putin saw, that he was treated differently, his country was treated differently by the various nations, and that he felt some weakness in the European approach towards Russia?
Thank you for that question. There was a lot of discussion inside the European Council and outside on what kind of relations we should have with Russia. There was a difference between Germany and France, between Eastern European countries and Western European countries, and so on. But we concluded an association agreement with Ukraine, by the way also with Georgia and Moldova, in 2014. And that was a key moment. Not everybody in the European Council was as happy as I was with that association agreement, including a free trade agreement with Ukraine. But we did it. Russia, Putin was strongly opposed to that. And he put pressure on the Ukrainian president of that time, Russian speaking by the way, Yanukovych, not to sign the association agreement. It provoked the uprising of Maidan and the beginning of all the problems we have today. So when President Putin says, I'm against Ukraine as a member of NATO, he was even more opposed to a close relationship between Ukraine and the European Union. You have to keep that in mind. And then after the annexation of Crimea, which was a violation of international law, by the way, we put sanctions on Russia, and he started a war in the eastern part of Ukraine. You know, 13,000 people were killed in the eastern part of Ukraine between 2014 and the 24th of February of this year. So there was a problem. And Ukraine became at the heart of our relationship with Russia. 2 years ago, I met former President Medvedev. He said, how can we normalize the relation between the European Union and Russia? And I asked him very simply, if we cannot find an understanding about Ukraine, if you cannot implement the so-called Minsk agreements between Germany, France, Ukraine, and Russia, will never have a normalization of our relationship with Ukraine. Of course, what happened now is of an other dimension, as Jean-Claude Juncker just said. We were strategic partners. Don't forget, Russia was a strategic partner of the European Union. Now we are enemies. We are enemies. And I fully agree that with Russia, eternal Russia, we have to speak and to dialogue. But now we are in a situation where speaking doesn't help at all. So this is a critical moment, and what I'm saying is really a commonplace. But I don't see a normalization of our relations with Russia, not a lifting of the sanctions. Extremely severe sanctions, much more severe than in 2014. We will not lift them if there is not some kind of peace settlement on Ukraine. And that will not be very soon, because for peace you have to negotiate, you need two to tango, so it will take not months, it can even take years. So this difficult relationship with Russia will last for a long, long period.
Coming back to Crimea and the attacks on Georgia, were we too weak? Were our sanctions too weak, or the reaction too weak that he said, okay, I tried Crimea, nobody reacted, or not forcefully? There were some measures taken, some sanctions. President Juncker, you were in the Commission at that time.
Yes, the sanctions were...
Mr. Mikko.
I have always a problem with new technologies. The sanctions we imposed on Russia after the invasion of Crimea were heavy, but they were not as heavy as they should have been, because Putin and the Russians, they managed to escape partially to these sanctions. The set of sanctions the European Union has imposed now are the heaviest we ever imposed on a third country, even heavier than those we had imposed on South Africa, which was the only example in history where sanctions have led to a positive result for those concerned by the internal situation in the sanctioned country. But I think that the Russians, as are the Chinese and as are our American friends, they always played games with the European Union because they tried not to discuss with the European Union and the leadership of the European Union, but with member states individually. So they were very skillful in dividing amongst themselves the member states of the European Union. That's a typical behavior of big powers when it comes to their relations with Europe. Trump did exactly the same as Obama did before. Obama was not a saint, and Trump neither. The Chinese are doing exactly the same. This Silk Road they have invented, the different degrees of cooperation they put into place with the member states of the European Union are proving this this temptation to divide the member states of the European Union. One of the main explanations for that is that in the domain of foreign policy, we are blocked by the principle of unanimity. This is time-consuming, this is energy-consuming, and this allows our partners, China, Russia, the US, to play the games they are used to. But now there is a new reality. We have to adjust to that reality. That means that the decision has to be made to change the principle of unanimity towards the principle of qualified majority, which is not an easy thing to do because you cannot declare war by qualified majority. You will always need unanimity. You can't send German soldiers without the agreement of the German government because you have a decision based on qualified majority in the European Council. So things have become by far more difficult, and the international landscape has changed because we had to reflect on our relations with the US during the mandate of Donald Trump, because he didn't like the Europeans. He always thought, that's what he told me, that the European Union was an invention by the Europeans against the United States of America, that they were the victims of the US, the victims of the economic performances of the European Union, which led to this trade imbalance between the European Union and the US. And after having met the Chinese leadership so many times during these summits between China and the European Union, I'm not convinced that we can continue as we are doing for the time being without changing the atmosphere in the relations between China and Europe. You have to know that the European Union doesn't have friends amongst the big powers. We don't have friends, we don't have allies, we have interests, as they have.
That's a very important point to which we come back and when we talk about the future of Europe, but I think these are very important comments. Mr. Van Rompuy, the fact that now we have all become, for obvious reasons, friends of the Ukraine, but Ukraine was always a complicated country. I remember that you, Prime Minister, you sent me to Ukraine when Luxembourg had the President of the European Union in 2005 for the inauguration of President Yushchenko. And one of the messages that you gave to me was make sure that they don't immediately give you the letter of application to the European Union. So during your time in the European Council and also thereafter, President Van Rompuy, if we had taken Ukraine into the European Union, was the mistake not to take them in? Would that have changed something? How do you assess the situation today?
Mm-hmm. Just one word about the previous question, but really very, very short. The Russians, and to some extent also the Chinese, have an other perception of foreign policy than we have. The European Union, when they speak about foreign policy, are mostly thinking in economic terms. Russia, also China, but even more Russia, is thinking in political terms. So for them, for example, security is much more important than the economy. And that's a mistake we made, some of us made. After 2014, Germany and the European Union made themselves even more dependent from Russian gas than before. The famous Nord Stream 2 pipeline was decided after the annexation of Crimea. And this shows that we were looking for cheap energy, good relations with Russia, but they were using gas as a political weapon, as an instrument of their foreign policy. And we were not used to it. And so they considered this as weakness, that we prefer economy instead of security. In Syria, they were bombarding the whole of the country, destroying the country. At a certain moment, President Obama said, when the chemical weapons were used, this is a red line. We should not cross the red line, and then we will take action. We didn't take action. And the Russians consider all this as symptoms of weakness. You prefer making money, we prefer politics, and when you are threatening, you are not, your deeds are not according to your words. And that inspired them to tougher action, and this is one of the results of what happened. Now, I come back on Ukraine. We concluded an association agreement with them, a free trade agreement. By the way, the exports of Ukraine to the European Union are skyrocketing. So they are changing completely their economic model. Of course, now their economy is partially destroyed. We have a visa-free agreement with them. So they are already close to the European Union, and the overwhelming majority of the people want a closer relationship with Europe. In the present circumstance, it would be good as a signal to accept their candidacy for membership, knowing that it's something that is not for the immediate future. I will not speak about decades, but it is not for the immediate future at all. But we have to do something more. And we have to be creative so that we, for Ukraine, also for Georgia, for Moldova, but especially for Ukraine, a country, by the way, of more than 40 million inhabitants, the biggest country of Europe geographically after Russia. So we have to do something more, some kind of upgrade for the association agreement, giving them also more security guarantees, even if they not become a member of NATO, so that we can show that they are making progress in their long journey to the European Union membership. And it has just accept them as a candidate is a symbolic gesture, but we have to do more. If we need to change, Jean-Claude, the treaties for that, could be a minor change. Why not? Why not? I said to my friends, you have in the European Union a clause in the EU treaty or an ever closer union among European citizens. Why not an ever closer association with some of the countries? And you don't need a convention for that. You don't need a big show for that. You just adapt the treaties so that we can show to the Ukrainian people that they are really belonging to the European family. But now we have to not only to help them with weapons, what we are doing, to help them with sanctions. We also have to give them what we call a European perspective, knowing that in the Union, not everybody is agreeing on a membership or a quick membership. Even today. I remember when I was in Kiev so many times in 2013, 2014 for preparing the association agreement, I used the word that association agreement was not the last step in our cooperation. Further, I couldn't go, because otherwise I would have problems with member states. And they are not yet solved. But here, this is really a moment where we have to show that Europe is much more even than the European Union, and that we have to have something, temporarily speaking, something between membership and the current association agreement.
Yeah. But is this not frustrating for these people? I make maybe a fast forward to what I wanted to talk about at the end, but as we are in this context, Mr. Juncker, the issue of enlargement, because if we would take in Ukraine now, there are also a lot in the Western Balkans who have been waiting for quite a while. We have the case of Turkey, which is a special case, but they have also been in the waiting room in a different situation for a long time. So how do you see this, the next steps of Ukraine vis-à-vis the European Union? Also taking into account the expectations that the people of Ukraine might have after this war, because they might feel even stronger towards the West than they did before.
We have too many special cases in the immediate neighborhood of the European Union. You have mentioned Turkey, which is a very special case. You have mentioned the Western Balkans, which is a more than very special case. And we have a Ukraine, which is a really special case. I don't believe that Ukraine will be a member of the European Union in the short term, probably not in the medium term. Why? Because we have negotiated, Herman, myself, and later on with Tusk, with the Ukrainian presidents. They came to Brussels, we went to Kiev, and the main topic always was corruption. And nothing has changed. When I went to Kiev during the mandate of the now President Zelensky, I told him, your electoral campaign has been financed by this and by that oligarch. And he said, okay, but all the other candidates were supported by the same. So I said, so all of you are corrupt, because this is not the normal way democracy should be organized. Corruption is a very serious problem on all the levels of the Ukrainian society. They are used to that, they don't like it, ordinary people don't like it. I was always of the opinion that the Maidan events, which were impressive, were less a move towards the European Union than a move against the corrupt system, people who were living in Ukraine. I don't like those who are saying we have to accelerate the accession process of Ukraine, because it will not work. It will not work. I'm in total agreement with Herman when he says Ukraine needs a European perspective. We have to put acts, we have to prove it, to show that things have changed, and now the way for Ukraine towards the European Union is an open gate, but don't nourish this illusion that they could be members of the European Union in the next coming years. Because, as you correctly mentioned, we have the Western Balkans. We promised them to become members of the European Union. They are more than candidates, they are negotiating. I was very surprised that the Ukrainian authorities were able to deliver an answer to the questionnaire of the Commission when it came to the preparation of the decision of the European Council to accept them as candidates, because with the Western Balkans, it took years. Now it was done in several days. I'm doubtful about the seriousness and about the in-depth analysis the Ukrainian authorities were giving to their request. I was, as Herman was, crossing the Western Balkans. They are highly disappointed by the illusion we have created that they could become members very soon. When I started as a president of the Commission, I said in the European Parliament, during my mandate, there will be no enlargement of the European Union because the countries are not ready for joining the European Union. Big disappointment in the Western Balkans. They hated me, but did they become members? No. When it comes to Ukraine, don't forget that this association agreement we have concluded back in 13 and 14 has been rejected by the Dutch people via referendum, because the Dutch government asked the Dutch, do you, yes or no, agree with this association agreement? The Dutch sovereign people said no. And then we took a decision in the European Council that the Ukraine would not become a member of the European Union in the next period. So things are difficult. Yes, we have special cases around us, and we are a special case too.
Talking about the sanctions. Sanctions are there to give a clear message to Putin that this is completely unacceptable, but obviously sanctions also have a high price for a number of countries in the center of Europe or the eastern part of the European Union, in particular when it comes to gas and oil, because they are much more dependent. The European Council and the European Union is unity in diversity, and here you feel this diversity because there are obviously people that are much more affected in the European Union by some of these sanctions. Herman, do you see this as a point of weakness of the European Union, that we do not manage to go to the toughest sanction, which would be to say no more gas, no more oil, but the price would of course be that in some Central European countries there would be some tough economic consequences? Or is this something that one has to accept in a diverse European Union?
Yeah, I'm also always tempted to emphasize the bright side of things. That's my character.
You are Belgian.
Yeah, we have to. I know that hoping is a verb. It's not just a sentiment. You have to make an effort to hope. But look at the sanctions today. They are really tough. Of course, under pressure of Eastern European countries, under pressure of the United States. But when you look at the sanctions, the financial sanctions, economic sanctions, it's never seen. And that's the bright side of things. And we agreed on this extremely rapidly. And we knew that the most difficult kind of sanctions would be related to energy, because we have that kind of situation. Don't forget, for instance, Germany, 60% of their imported gas comes from Russia. And the relative part increased since 2014, since the annexation of Crimea, as I said. So it's not decreasing. We hope that it would decrease. It's not the case. It has increased. So you need a transition period. So that's even the common sense. Why? Also because if we are too tough, then we lose the support of our own people. Our own people who are now very solidary with Ukraine, also on a personal basis. In my commune, 60 or 70 people are receiving, and there's a small commune, receiving Ukrainian families in their home, in their home. So there is a lot of solidarity. So we have to keep that kind of solidarity and not embarking on a policy that is creating some kind of backlash so that the people are asking themselves what kind of price are we paying for helping the people we so much like. And so we need a societal and political base for our Ukrainian policy. So a transition period is absolutely needed. The problem is how long and for whom, and I will not embark on this. I'm not in politics, happily so, anymore. But that is a transition period is not a sign of weakness. Okay. It's in order to help Ukraine. But in the same time, we have sanctions, we have weapons that we have to deliver. That's absolutely needed today. That we made, with the European Union, also unprecedented efforts, because normally we cannot do it. We cannot do it. It's not foreseen in the treaties. Huh? We do it. We do it. And don't forget, after the war, we have to embark on a gigantic reconstruction program. Gigantic. And it's only the West who will do it. There will no Belt and Road program for Ukraine. No. We have to do it. So, and for me, that's more important than discussion about membership. What kind of sanctions, so that we get rid as soon as possible with the transition of Russian oil and gas. Then we have weapons, and then we have the efforts that have to be made on reconstruction. That is what the Ukrainian people expect from us. And if in the meantime we can open a new perspective by, according to the suggestions I just made, then we show that we are solidary with these brave people who are suffering for nothing. Eh? May I add some point, Luc, that is not very well known in our countries here. In the 30s, I know it is almost 100 years ago, a century ago, 2 or 3 million Ukrainians starved to death under Stalin. The Ukrainians, peasants, didn't want to be collectivized. So they were refusing to be integrated in this collectivization of Soviet agriculture. He took away, Stalin, the wheat from Ukraine, so that people starved, 2 or 3 million. That is called the Holodomor, the Holodomor. And so these people suffered already a lot during their history. And they are now suffering again from the same kind of aggression. Actually, it is a colonial war. It's a colonial war. They want to make Ukraine again a colony. So this is so horrible, so horrible. So we have to make, on the short term, all the efforts I just mentioned, sanctions, weapons, reconstruction, and an opening perspective for EU membership. They really deserve it. They really deserve it. Yeah.
When I presented you, Prime Minister Juncker, I forgot one of your titles, which was President of the Eurogroup. And these are first permanent President of the Eurogroup, and as these are also very difficult economic times, and a lot of these people in the audience and on the screens are business people, we are now faced with public debt in Europe, in the Eurozone, which is close to 100% of GDP. Deficits are high also because of the rescue packages of the pandemic. There will be more investment needed now for defense, green transition. How will this work? And the Stability and Growth Pact is temporarily not alive for reasons due to COVID. So, in a nutshell, what does this mean for the Eurozone?
You can't really compare the period we are in now with the period I was in the chair of the Eurogroup, because during that time we had specific cases, once again, Greece, Spain, Portugal, others, Cyprus. and we solve these problems. I will be in Athens tomorrow, becoming a member of the Academy of Science. You are very surprised by that, but it's justified because I always explain to the Greeks, this is about financial science and not about feelings. But the feeling was important because during that period, the Greek people were treated with benign neglect, with hatred, and with stupid accusations in our part of Europe. And they are doing well. The Greek economy is growing, and I will always remember, when I was president of the Commission back in 2015, that more than half of the member states wanted to exclude Greece from the euro area, mainly parts of the German government. I refused that because it would have meant the end of the euro area and the euro. During the period between 14 and 19, we made a lot of progress when it comes to the consolidation of public finances. The average deficit went down from 6.3 to 0.2, unexpected, and against the opposition of some of the member states who wanted to apply the Stability and Growth Pact in a very strict manner. The public debt went dramatically down by more than 20% in this 5 years period. And now, of course, and the deficit, the annual deficit of the budgets and public debt increased. Did we have another choice? No, because COVID was pushing us to develop European answers to the COVID crisis. And that, in addition to that, the Ukrainian war was changing the reality in a dramatic way. What I want to say is that, of course, the Commission was right, the now Commission, to put the Stability Pact between brackets for 22 and for 23. I don't see the member states coming back to the Stability Pact in all its dimensions during this year or next year, but we have to make clear to those we are governing that we cannot increase endless the level of public debt. We have to start, after 2 or 3 years, to pay back the debt we have made during the last 2 or 3 years. There is no other way. And I don't like the idea to postpone this to the 50s of this century, because this gives the impression that everything is possible. And listening to public debates in Germany, in France, and elsewhere, mainly in Germany and France, it seems that governments have the impression that they can do whatever they want. Free beer for everyone. That's not the way we should try to come out of the crisis, because the financial markets, they are observing us. I'm not a fan of financial markets, because there were failures too in the financial markets. When I chaired the Intergovernmental Conference leading to the EMU back in '91, our impression was that, of course, we have to fix rules. As the European Union doesn't have a government, the European Union does need rules. And if those rules are not respected by member states being part of the euro area, financial markets will sanction them. They didn't. They started to become critical when Greece entered a very difficult period of its post-war history. So let's not trust the financial markets, but if they will get the impression that there is money to be made, they will make it. without respecting the dignity of people.
Herman, maybe also your assessment on the economic situation. You also dealt a lot with the Stability and Growth Pact. I served in your Van Rompuy task force at the time, so I remember the discussions we had. But Jean-Claude Juncker just said, spoke about free beer. As a Belgian, of course, you are the specialist of the beer. And is too much money spent right now? And will this lead to an economic problem, taking also into account that interest rates may go up? So obviously this will be an additional pressure on ordinary people, on companies, and on countries, as we have a very high inflation. Mm-hmm. So in a nutshell, how do you assess the economic situation of Europe in light of the geopolitical turbulences?
Yeah, of course, the big problem today also in politics is inflation. Also, there's not only in the economy, but also in the political world. If Madame Le Pen got 42% of the votes, that nothing to do with migration, nothing to do with Europe, all to do with purchasing power. And you have in all the countries, let's say the ruling parties are suffering, and those who are in government suffering from this popular backlash against the rise of prices and the loss of purchasing power. So this is not only an economic issue, it is also a political issue. But let's face things as they are. Inflation, for instance, is not only what we call, I'm a former economist, as you know, a former economist. That's 40 years ago that I read a scientific article. But it's not only a demand pull inflation. There is, of course, excessive demand coming after the COVID period and so on. But there are also supply aspects in it. What we call the interruptions in the supply chain and the perturbations and so on. You cannot tackle that with monetary policy because it is on the other side, it is on the supply side that you have that kind of problems. We are facing, I think it's in Luxembourg, it's in Belgium, it is in the Netherlands, in many countries, shortages on the labor market. Shortages on the labor market, can you imagine? Eh? We thought that we would face after COVID a series of bankruptcies, failures, huge unemployment. Nothing at all happened. We have labor shortage. So, and this is also playing a role in the rise of inflation. So we have to be, and I think that our monetary authorities are cautious. They are determined, but also cautious, not to kill the economy, because inflation is not only related to demand, because they have only an impact on demand. It's also related to problems, as I said, on the production side. So how to find the right balance, and everybody is struggling with that, but unfortunately, a tightening of monetary policy is inevitable, and interest rates will go up. They already go up. When I look at the long-term interest rates in the market, they haven't waited until the ECB is taking measures. You have it already. And as Jean-Claude said, you have this general problem, but how are the different member states reacting? When I look to some of the member states, I will not mention their name, who are now again at 1.5, even 2% above the German interest rates, then I'm worried. I'm worried. Because there is not only an overall problem, there is also a relative problem within the Eurozone. And this remembers me by far. It's not comparable. I fully agree with what Mr. Juncker just said. You cannot compare it. But in any case, we shouldn't fall in the same mistakes as we did in the past. So it is a difficult period. I come again to the politics. Have you heard a politician coming from a traditional party, of course not from a populist party. Have you heard any politician to speak about austerity? I didn't heard it for years, In my country, nobody, even those who are in favor of the most orthodox policies, are promoting deep budgetary cuts. I'm not speaking about tax raises. Nobody. So this is, of course the central bank was not to go to polls. They are not elected, and happily so. But those who are elected are in a very difficult situation, because we know that we can let go up public debt and deficits, but at the same time, the popular base for measures after COVID and with this war is very small. It's very small. So the room of maneuver of politicians today in terms of public finance this room of maneuver is small. Is small. And so again, this from the political side also, for the monetary side, they have to balance, as I said, the different causes of inflation. But from the political side, they also have to be extremely cautious. Of course, inflation in some way can help, because your denominator is increasing, and interest rates are not following the level of inflation. And so, of course, inflation is bad in the longer term, but on the short term, it's not necessarily bad for the treasuries. You are a former Minister of Finance, I see you smiling, but we cannot say it too loudly. We cannot say it too loudly, but we know that on the longer term, of course, measures has to be taken. But the circumstances with rising populism all over Europe are extremely tough for people in government to take the necessary measures. So it will be step by step, it will be over a period of time, and I said it 10 years ago, the direction is more important than the speed.
And I fully agree, although the measures of financial discipline and fiscal discipline were never popular. Also not in the previous crisis, but that is for next debate.
Yeah.
For time reasons, maybe we conclude. I have one last question for both of you. We are in the midst of the war, and this war is terrible, we all agree on that. What comes afterwards? Are we entering in a new Cold War? Prime Minister Juncker mentioned China, the US. So where will Europe be, let's say 5 years ahead? I'm not looking to decades ahead, but where do you see Europe in light of this new données géopolitique, which it is, because we saw we were on a continent of peace, freedom, stability, democracy. Now there are countries out there who are not necessarily looking to the same direction than Europe does. So what is your outlook for 5 years from now for Europe, taking into account the US, China, and others? Who wants to start? Herman?
Yeah, and stop me when I'm too long.
Because I know that Jean-Claude Juncker wants to have the last word always.
I will give him for sure the last word. So a key concept now for the European Union, and I don't know if Jean-Claude is as happy as I am with that concept, is what we call strategic autonomy. And I know that for the real Europeans that was a little bit embarrassing, but I was always very much in favor for that concept. Not only in terms of defense, but also in energy, in the digital, on migration, on monetary. Don't forget the role of the dollar is extremely high, is extremely important, even more important than the American economy. So we need much more European sovereignty. And I think that this war in Ukraine helped us to be fully aware of that. So I expect a stronger Europe, yes. Nobody is speaking about leaving the Union anymore. We are speaking about new members, not about those who will leave. We are speaking about more Europe, also after the COVID crisis. People ask me, why was Europe in the COVID crisis? They were not saying, no, let's get rid of Europe. Not at all. They wanted more Europe. So I expect it will take time, a stronger Europe and a more sovereign Europe in a completely changed world. Completely changed. And we are happy now to have President Biden. So in the new world, the West is back. You had the period with President Trump. Yes. President Trump called Europe, the European Union, at certain moments an enemy. Can you imagine? An enemy. He waged a trade war with us. You had to go to Washington to negotiate successfully, by the way, successfully, a ceasefire on trade. So this changed dramatically. The West is more united than the last 20 years. But that does not prevent us to be cautious, because in America everything can change. The last 20 years, there was a balance from unilateralism under Bush to multilateralism under Obama, unilateralism under Trump, multilateralism under Biden. Who knows what the future will bring? So we need strong transatlantic relations now that we have this democratic president who likes Europe, who loves Europe. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that strategic autonomy is also regarding the United States from utmost importance. With China, China has made a mistake, I think. They became the friend of our enemies. On the wrong moment. Just before the war started in Ukraine, they concluded this close friendship agreement with Russia. I think they are not happy with that war at all. They prefer stability, not that kind of war. But it will impact also our relations with China. China is a partner, for instance, on climate change. It's a competitor, but they have to comply with the rules, which they are not doing on many occasions. But they are, even more than before the 24th of February, what we call a strategic or systemic rival. They are not enemies, not at all. So we have to say them clearly what our position is. We have to be much more sovereign, as I said and I repeat it, but we have to be in dialogue with China. They are so important in the world economy that we cannot ignore them at all. We cannot isolate them. So we have to be firm on our principles, firm in the defense of our interests, without any naivety, but we have to keep in touch. So the world has changed. The West is back. Russia will face a very tough period in the upcoming decades. Very tough period after this war, which weakened them profoundly. Even if they won the war, they would have been weakened. And with China, we are entering since a few years in a new era, but after this war, even more new than before.
Thank you. Jean-Claude Juncker.
I do think that after all these crises, after this Polish crisis, the European Union will be stronger. Whenever the European Union is facing situations like this, the European Union is becoming more united. Remember the Brexit. Before the vote of the British people, everyone in Europe considered that this would open a long period of crises inside the European Union. That did not happen. The cohesion between member states was increasing. Have a look at what happened during the first period of the pandemic. Each and every one of the member states were trying to cook its pandemic soup in its own corner, with the result that the European Union as such and countries taken individually had no answer to oppose to the pandemic crisis until the European Union took over the lead, trying to put together all the efforts and energies of the European Union, committing some mistakes, but that was unavoidable. Take the war in Ukraine. The cohesion was never as strong and firm than it is today. Who would have thought that after having seen the return of war to the European continent, that member states, not only at NATO, but also on the level of the European Union, would stick together as they are sticking together today, because now it becomes obvious, it was always obvious for me, that standalone positions by European nations are of no virtue, because we have to work together. Then we have to reflect on what will happen the day after tomorrow. And I think that a real issue of the next coming years, if not decades, is European defense. We have to pull together all the defense efforts we are organizing in our different countries. The European defense landscape is ridiculous in the way that in Europe we have 174 kinds of weapons, Waffengattung. In the US, 30. We have many tank types, many more tank types than the US do have. We have much more plane kinds than the US do have. We have half of the defense budget of the US. So we should be at least at 50% of their degree of efficiency. No, we are at 15% because we are not working together. We are losing between 64 and 100 billion per year because of this disorganized European defense sector. So we have to work on that, and it gives us credibility, because I would never have believed that this time would come back. If you are weak on a military plan, you are weak on other plans, including economics. So let's put our public finances in order. Let's organize the European defense in a better way. And let's not forget about the climate change, because this is a crisis we will live in for decades if we are not reacting now. And we have to change our treaties in order to make it possible to have, I like that formula, an ever closer partnership, association agreement. We should develop our trade relations with the rest of the world. International trade is of huge importance. 46 million of jobs are directly depending in Europe from foreign trade. Let's not be too much impressed by Trump and by others, but let's oppose to the views of those who don't like multilateralism and who don't like well-organized international trade organizations. Let's oppose European unity to them. When I was negotiating with my good friend Donald Trump, he told me what Merkel told him, what Macron told him, what Johnson told him, what the Italian Prime Minister, I don't remember his name because I have known so many. And I said, that's of no interest. You have to discuss with the European Commission, because the European Commission is in charge of trade and not member states. And that is always creating some impression on those who are not really aware about what the European Union is. I told Donald, you have to talk to me, to nobody else. L'État, c'est moi. Yes, and he believed it.
Thank you very much, President Van Rompuy, President Juncker.